Okay. It's an exciting start. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I'm very honored to be part of this conference. It's been quite the morning. So, when I was invited to speak here at Impact and had a chat with Gabby beforehand, she suggested that I share a little bit about my journey as a travel journalist. And I started sort of peeling back the layers. And I realized that actually, 20 years ago, I was not thinking about impact at all. I'm going to paint a little picture for you of me and my friends, Nadine and Mary, and what we really cared about was having a great time, looking for the best luxury hotels we could stay in every destination. So we'd pick a place, and then we'd try to outdo each other on what was the most lavish place we could stay at, and we just had a grand time. And, you can't really blame us. That's what the travel industry was telling us, and marketers. Enjoy yourself, indulge. It's all about you. And we did enjoy it. And I remember one time we were in Lisbon, and after a night out, we took a taxi back to the hotel. We told them we were staying at Pestaña Palace, and the taxi driver was like, wow, did you know that that's where Madonna stays when she's in town? We're like so chuffed, patting ourselves on the back. And sure, we love to dab in culture. We love meeting locals and trying the food that was in Rome, all of those things. But impact, about, thinking about our impact on places and the social, economic, environmental footprint and trickle-down effect of our presence on places, that definitely never occurred to us. In fact, I don't even remember anybody talking to me about that in the early aughts. So, and then the Caribbean happened. I was a burnt-out attorney. I had about 2 weeks vacation that I was about to lose, and I decided that I was going to spend it in the Caribbean. I would go solo. And again, I stayed at a really luxurious resort, and it was called the Body Holiday. Anybody heard of the Body Holiday in St. Lucia? Yeah, Deirdre says yes. Yeah, so you get a free spa treatment included in the rate every single day. I don't know if it's still like that, but that sounded pretty blissful to me. And the hardest decision was, am I getting a spa treatment? Am I getting a facial today or a massage tomorrow? That was the toughest choice. Or so I thought, right? And so about a week in, I realized that actually the true bliss was not inside the resort. It was off property. And I went to Fish Fry, and then I went to Martinique, Fort-de-France, for a day. It was the capital of Martinique. And it was so vibrant and just, full of culture. I went to the markets, I was seeing people interacting, and it was quite jarring. And I thought, well, that's funny. I didn't see any of this when I was researching the destination, and this is what I want more of. And so I vowed that the next time I would return to the Caribbean, I would not stay at an all-inclusive resort. And I decided that I would test that out in Jamaica, solo. And Mary and Nadine were like, are you insane? Jamaica is dangerous, right? You're a woman, you can't go by yourself, the men are aggressive, cue many other tropes about Jamaica, and I went anyway. I stayed at a small family-owned hotel, independently owned, and it was so small that the staff kind of took you in, and I kind of discovered a side of travel that I didn't even know I was looking for, which was more local, more immersive. And I wanted to know more about that, and I wanted to come back. So I quit my job, I went back to the Caribbean, and I knew that there was something there for me in terms of the storytelling aspect of it. Now picture an entire stadium filled with people dressed in Pan-African colors, red, green, gold, celebrating independence in Grenada. And then after that, a celebration on the beach for an annual workboat regatta. Or in the hills of Jamaica, in the south, deep in the mountains, is an annual festival hosted by the Akongpong town Maroons. The Maroons are, they're former enslaved Africans who managed to gain independence from the British, and they used the mountains to maneuver the terrain and fight against the British. And now they have this little independent community up in the hills, and at the time, not many people knew about this, and they have ceremonies there every year. Or picture a Caribbean carnival, except you're in Central America, in Belize. For 3 weeks, they celebrate independence in September. And again, I was just blown away that this existed, and yet that's not what I was seeing in tourism marketing materials. No one was telling me about the culture, the heritage. No one was telling me about the resilience of Caribbean people. But I knew that that's what I wanted to do more of. And so fast forward, I got a chance to be a guidebook author. Now, let's be honest, guidebook authors barely make any money. Nobody can live on $10,000 a year. But I knew that there was promise to it. I knew that I could do something with my time if I just lived in the Caribbean, stayed there, traveled slowly, and wrote about the things that I saw that no one else was telling me about in the tourism industry. So I saw myself as some sort of bridge, if you will, between the communities who had offered me a window into their lives and into their tourism jobs and all of that, and people in the global north who were used to seeing the Caribbean as just one big resort. And I gotta tell you, that moment changed everything for me, the moment I made that decision. So, this is Marva. I remember still to this day meeting her. I showed up in her yard outside her restaurant. She was closed that day, actually. This is in Hopkins Village on the east coast of Belize, where the Garifuna, indigenous Garifuna live. And when I showed up, she was in her nightgown still, and she came out to see who was, you know when someone contacts you on your day off, and or you get that email on a public holiday, and you're just like, who is this? And that was Marva's face when I showed up. And she said, well, we're closed. And so I made my case. I said, Marva, I really was hoping to try Garifuna food and learn about your culture. I grew up in West Africa. I grew up in Ivory Coast. And I see so many similarities, and I really just wanted to learn, She took a good look at me and then looked at her watch and said, come back at 1. Yes. So I was so excited, came back at 1, and Marva, you see, changed her clothes. And did an entire session of making hudut, which is a fish, in a coconut sauce that you eat with mashed plantain. And we did every single step in her yard, then in her kitchen, then back in her yard. And throughout that time, she shared with me some of the struggles and some of the issues that her culture was facing in this very touristed village. That was a Garifuna village originally. Marva is the only Garifuna-owned 100% property in Hopkins. And so during that time, she shared with me that all the expats who'd moved there and bought property and land used to come to her restaurant, except after a while, they'd opened their own businesses, and they were now taking the tourists there. They were no longer visiting her. And then she also told me about the kids who were losing their language, and they didn't think it was cool to talk Garifuna in school. And so from there, I met many other individuals who literally formed for me what tourism is. This is Patty Ramirez. She is a dive shop owner in Belize. She's quite well known now, but at the time, she just had a tiny little dive shop, little shack by the sea in Placencia, Belize, in the south. She worked her way up to building a state-of-the-art dive center now in Belize, one of the best. Which that's not where she started, but the amazing thing about Patty is not that she was successful with her business, is that she took other people along with her. And she created, from scratch, this sponsorship program where she would give adults in the village, young adults in the village, a chance to become a dive master. So she sponsored their courses because she knew that being a dive master would immediately elevate their income. They could eventually become entrepreneurs, and maybe they could even go work for someone else. It didn't have to be for her. And she also then created a program for high school students where they get to shadow someone in tourism. It's called Be My Mentor. And they also learn first aid and all of these other really practical skills. And you can see I have dates on there because every time living through these different destinations doing my books, I was coming back over and over, touching base again, and built a relationship over time. At this point, I'm probably going off script, but the emotions getting the best of me. Then this is David. I met David while I was working on the Dominican Republic guidebook. Again, I spent an entire year in the country, going from province to province and just living there and getting to know people. And David was a 20-something mountain guide when I met him, probably barely 21. Most Americans have never heard of Jarabacoa in Dominican Republic. It is in the center of the Dominican Republic, no beaches around, all mountains. In fact, a lot of Europeans go there because they want to hike to Pico Duarte, which is the highest peak in the Caribbean. And it's like a 2-day trek, and then you camp overnight, and then you get to the peak at sunrise, and you can see over the top of the Caribbean. And David grew up in Jarabacoa. He's from there. He knows it inside out, and he doesn't speak a lick of English, or at least not at the time, but he still took these tourists around because he knew the place, right? And he was pretty dynamic, and nobody really cared that he didn't speak English. Well, he didn't have any digital skills, so the most he had was like a Facebook page. And so when I met him, I speak Spanish, so I was able to communicate with him and managed to translate everything he was telling me into my book for others to benefit from and for it to benefit David. And he showed me all of his best spots, and we hung out, and then, that was that. And then a year later, I get a phone call from him, and he's completely beside himself. And he's like, I can't believe this. I can't believe you did this. And I'm like, oh, my God, what did I do? And he's like, go and Google, David, go and Google Pico Duarte Mountain Guide, Dominican Republic. I'm like, okay. And for a good time, David was #1 on the results on Google because my publisher had published an excerpt from my book about why they should use David as a guide. It brought him a lot of business. He had to ask one of this expat who was living in the area at the time to help him with the reservations, because again, he didn't speak English. There are lots of people like David, by the way. Lots of people who are left in the cracks of tourism. And so from that moment on, every time I went back to Jarabacoa, David refused for me to even buy water. I mean, it was really awkward almost, and I kept saying, no, it's okay, no, it's okay, no, it's okay. It was really crazy. And then, the book also had a page on social impact tourism because a lot of people go to the Dominican Republic and don't give 2 seconds to think about their impact at all. And yet there are many community-based tourism organizations there that you can support. So doing these books, I met people from all walks of life who are in tourism: taxi drivers, general managers, tour guides, you name it, resort workers, and they became my tourism school, is what I always say. The Caribbean people were my tourism school. And these are the kinds of stories that shape my understanding of tourism. I mean, it's not just a mere transaction, right? It's deeply human. It's a deeply human exchange that I think is extremely lost these days. I mean, I was listening to some of the speakers this morning, and I found myself nodding. And I mean, at other times, I kept thinking, well, I think we do a disservice when we're a little too idealistic about things. Because the truth is that we've definitely lost a lot of the human touch of tourism with technology. And there are people being left behind. So, a little more recently, I was in Asheville, North Carolina, to write about their new Black Heritage Trail, and I met all these people again, because I had this habit of making connections in the places that I visited. People aren't just passing through for me, they're lifelong connections. I have them in my phone still, So when the Hurricane Helene hit and completely devastated parts of West Carolina, I immediately thought of these folks that I met for my story and thought, wow, and parts of Asheville, including the River Arts District, which attracts a lot of tourists because of all the art galleries. I don't know if anybody's been to Asheville. Yeah. So it's a lovely area, and to think that all of that was washed away, to think that all the artists who lost their tools, their studios. So I contacted some of the folks. Some of them one of them said to me, I think she was from the tourism board, she said, oh, my house was washed away. So I was busy looking for an apartment. A couple other people had to move out of town. But what really struck me is what one of the marketers sent me a message, because I had gotten in touch, and I wanted to include something in a Bloomberg newsletter about it so that people could support. And she was pretty much floored that I even cared. How is that even a thing? And she sent me a message saying, that she deeply respected my decision to follow up with her. For me, that was all I knew, but it's not the norm. It's not the norm. So, of course, staying long-term in all of these places in the Global South, generally, I saw a lot of bad. I saw good tourism. I saw a lot of bad tourism. In Jamaica and Dominican Republic, I would talk to tour guides who were struggling to get certified because of some, onerous requirements or a lot of hoops that they had to jump through. I remember hearing stories from staff at all-inclusive resorts, and they would tell me, well, it costs about, you could make about $200 a month if you're, a server. Or you can make $400 if you're a reservation desk person. And I remember also myself trying to go to the beach sometimes, or being in establishments and being looked at twice, or being asked for my ID because I didn't look like the typical tourist, I looked like a local. So the undercurrents of colonialism were very much present. Privatization of beaches, exclusion of locals, extraction of wealth. Now we have this massive gentrification problem in the Caribbean as well. And living in these countries year-round, I began to see the threads that linked everyone to this system that is called tourism. But I kept asking myself, when I was preparing for this, why does it even bother me so much? What is it about it that moves me to write about these things? I mean, yeah, I'm an empath. I'm sure many of us in here are empaths, or we wouldn't be at an impact conference. And I heard Keith earlier today. Man, that really floored me. How? I thought Indigenous Tourism Canada was on top. And to hear that it's going down is just devastating to me. So why do I care? You say, because I know what opportunity means. And tourism is opportunity. If my own dad hadn't had the opportunity to study, to go abroad, to take his family abroad, to give us a chance to experience different cultures, to speak different languages, I would not be here today. Yes, it takes individual effort, it takes, work, ambition, but someone has to open the door for you for that to happen. Tourism loves to say that there's such easy entry. We're such an easy entry industry. Well, yeah, but you'll stay easy entry for a long time unless somebody opens the door for you. You're just going to be, the menial worker forever because they're not opening the door for you. That's my dad. So I had many passports beforehand. I had a red color passport, and then I went on to the blue. That was really nice. And again, when I speak about opportunity, it's because someone has to open the door for you. This is Grace Fujimoto. She is when I met her, she was acquisitions editor at Moon Guides, and now she's like the big honcho boss. She's editor-in-chief at Moon Guides. When I met Grace, I hadn't written a book ever. I had a few bylines, and she knew that I loved Belize, and obviously I went through a whole book proposal process and all of that, but deep down one day she told me, no, what I saw in you was passion. That's what I wanted, and she gave me a chance to be an author, which then transformed my career. There are not many people like Grace in the industry today. I hate to say that, but it's true. You know, we love to pat ourselves on the back sometimes too much. But the truth is that we like to hire people that look like us, and we need to change that. We are at a time when DEI is being rolled back massively. In the United States, it's kind of like the bad thing now, the bad word, 4-letter word, even though it's 3 letters. There's anti-everything going on right now. And if you think of people who were already struggling in tourism before, you can imagine what's going to happen moving forward. And those are the things that I like for people to just sometimes stop and think about. So, on a more positive note, I felt like we were losing the meaning of tourism, and I really thought about what I could do to change my work and make it more meaningful. And so a year ago, while at Bloomberg, we have this annual meeting every year. We throw our ideas out there, and I asked to author a column that would address solutions, tourism solutions, and see who was doing what, you know, who's doing good in the world and in the world of tourism, and who was really changing things. Could we really be equitable, inclusive? Really, or is it just platitude? So I gave it a shot, and I learned so much through the process. One of the, as I go through these examples, perhaps, you know, it'll spark interest or maybe an idea that's related to something you're doing, who knows, but that's the goal of me sharing these. Brazil decided to tap into tourism, not just to diversify their sector, but to use tourism as a way to tackle racism in Brazil. Tourism as a tool to bring down systemic racism, which is pretty incredible. Of course, you have to have the leadership that's on board with that. And so what they've been doing, oh, I think I skipped something. Oh no. Okay, there's a slide missing. Never mind. So they took several steps to make that happen. It wasn't just top down. They brought in grassroots organizations. They brought in tour guides who were already operating solo without any government support. They brought everyone together who cared about giving a more diverse narrative of Brazil. And even in Rio, for example, you go to Rio de Janeiro, you know, you see a one-sided story of Rio. But Rio, in fact, was one of the main places where they brought enslaved Africans by the masses. And for a long time, that's been ignored in tourism. And now it's completely changed, in part because of the work that the tour guides had been doing, except now the government is embracing them. So they created a new position at the tourism board, someone who's in charge of Afro-Brazilian, building Afro-Brazilian tourism, as well as indigenous tourism in Brazil, a specific position for that. And then they've been liaising with content creators. They're creating an app that is bringing together all of the roots, Afro-Brazilian roots in the country together in one app. There's a lot going on, and they produced a report that is unfortunately in Portuguese, so I'm still kind of going through it myself. But it's a whole report on the state of Afro-Brazilian tourism, how you can use it as a tool to address racism, and what's left to be done, a specific plan, if you will. And then I'm sure many of you are familiar with Discover Aboriginal Experiences from Tourism Australia, this collective of Aboriginal businesses. But what really impressed me while I was doing this story is that they have case studies now. They're doing case studies to show exactly where the tourism revenue is going from each of these tour companies. And it's incredible. One of them is giving away 50% of his profits to preserve the culture, to train the youth. Another one is using it for a school in their Aboriginal language. There's just so many good things you can do with tourism, and I think that the fact that they spelt it out and are doing case studies is quite incredible. I've not seen a lot of proof from other places as far as that goes. But one thing that one of these tour guides told me, and it really hit me, Johanny, because I think it encapsulates a lot about this industry. he said to me, you know, we're not saying to give us handouts. We're saying actually consider us. Consider that we can play a fair game in this space as long as we get treated as a fair player. Man, that really hit me hard. Consider us. I think that's something the industry does not do. And unfortunately, that quote didn't make it in the story, but I knew that I was going to share it somewhere, somehow. So thank you, Impact. I could share that. Let me just get myself together here. So I have a confession to make. I mean, at some point, I got very disillusioned as well. And I know some people have expressed this at the conference, so I'm glad I'm not the first. But I did reach a point where I was completely disillusioned. I was not seeing much change happening. Yes, there were a few people doing good things. But while I was doing the column, it hit me really hard to some realities, you know, like a story about an airplane for dogs will get 1,000 more clicks. And like a story on indigenous tourism is true. I see it. I see it in black and white. People will click on the most superficial things, but no one really clicks on meaningful tourism stories. I mean, not no one, but like the percentages are vast. The gap is vast. Why? I kept asking myself why. So I decided I was going to go to Italy, take a vacation, and figure it out. I went to Sicily on a retreat. And of course, the journalist in me was like, oh, I'm so close to Venice. I could go to Venice and see how things are going there with over-tourism. Because I'd written about it quite a bit. And I also knew someone there who had been a source of mine for many of my stories, an activist. So after I regrouped a bit in Sicily, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Venice. And this lady, Jane Damosto, some of you might have seen her in coverage about Venice and protests against big cruise. And I went to meet her. She's like, yeah, come, please come. So Jane is actually not just an activist, an anti-big cruise. She is an environmental scientist. She's the founder of We Are Here Venice NGO, who's doing incredible work restoring the lagoon, trying to, build it to be resilient against erosion and all of these waves that the cruise ships are disrupting, have been disrupting, and educating kids as well in school about the importance of the lagoon to the life of Venice. And so we spent the day together. I probably got to see a side of Venice that a few people have. Or she took me in. Her family's been there for more than 30 years. I had lunch with her and her kids, and we talked about, what she calls the evils of cruise. and then we had coffee, and while we were having coffee at this really cute outdoor cafe hidden from St. Mark's Square, I said, Jane, I don't know. I'm just not seeing much change, and I'm feeling kind of disillusioned. There was so much greenwashing coming across my desk. Oh, Lord, piles of greenwashing. Please don't tell me you are sustainable when you're building in a protected area. I could give you 10 more examples, but so much of my time as a reporter is spent sifting through those greenwashing claims, and I felt like the status quo was winning: inequity, profits over planet people, vapid influencer campaigns. And so Jane looked at me, and she said, Lily, no change is too small. No change is too small. I was like, wow. So I went back to my room. I started thinking about what she'd said. And I realized she was right. I started thinking about all of the folks who had crossed my path or tried every effort I'd put into giving them exposure or telling their story and the way that they'd shared their story with me. And I realized she's right. Change doesn't happen all at once. But it also doesn't happen unless we take steps with intention. And I would say that in this moment of like profound change in the world and crises, small steps are like critical, urgent, non-negotiable. So don't ask how you can integrate local community tourism. This is a question I get all the time. Reach out. It doesn't matter how small of a step it is. It doesn't matter how silly it seems. Like I think someone said that on a panel earlier, have coffee. You can change the world over coffee. Right. So, what small change could you put into place today, here, before the end of the conference? What will you do to open the door to new perspectives, to new people, to new voices? Take the first step, the second, the third, humble yourself, be kind. Just listen. You don't have to have solutions. I don't have the solution still, 20 years in as a journalist. But I do listen, and I try to, treat folks in fairness. And so my message to you is please consider people as equals, not as charity cases, but as equals, as people with brilliant ideas who simply just haven't had anyone open the door yet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily. I think following the mayor's speech at lunch where she said, take care of others, you gave us some great stories about how you've taken care of others. And sorry for the bit of confusion. I do want to acknowledge that Julie and MMGY Global sponsored Lily's session. And so I wanted to voice that appreciation.